What's up, my fellow emo, pop punk, metalcore music lovers? Matrix here, and you were locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alt-rock music fix. We are back with the second part of our album roundup, whatever the hell you want to call it, the albums that have been missed in the past couple of weeks because everybody decided to drop albums. This one is another bigger one in terms of the albums that were released. A lot of fun with these, but can't go over every single album as I mentioned at the end of last episode. So there's going to be some ones that you probably would expect me to cover or would like me to cover. Dangerous Summer, Voila, Jaden, those types of albums are just not going to get covered because I just don't have the time to get with every single one of those albums much as I'd like to. I want to get out some album reviews that I think people are more interested in and in some artists that maybe people don't know about. So that's what you're going to get here a little bit. So stick with me. We got one more after this. And then at the end of these three podcasts, you're going to get the mid-year best of list. And I think that's everybody's favorite podcast. It's my best performing podcast from last year. And everybody seems to love when I do lists or, who's the best, who's this, who's that. So looking forward to doing that one for you guys in a future episode. As always, the link to everything you need is in the description of this episode. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all my links are down there. If you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, go ahead and leave a 5-star review. That absolutely helps to boost this podcast up so that people can see that this is a good one to listen to. And as I always do, I'm going to ask that you share this podcast with friends, family, coworkers, whoever it is that's in your life that needs a new podcast or likes alternative music. Share this with them so that they can continue to grow our little community of alt-rock music lovers. With that, we're going to jump into our album reviews, with the first one being Stigma by Wage War. This is Wage War's 5th album and their first one since 2022, 2021, around there. And this was one of my more confusing albums that I had to review, because it was kind of a little bit of a mixture of everything in terms of the music that we got, because we had a very heavy side of Wage War with songs like Self-Sacrifice or Nails or Tombstone. But then we also had, and I hate to use this phrase, I really do, but we had some octane core type songs where we know that they are definitely for radio and definitely to get some airplay, with songs like Magnetic or Hellbent. And the reason I hate to use octane core is because I feel like that's just kind of a generic thing that people use anymore when it comes to the metal or metalcore side of this alternative rock genre, because anything that's getting played on that type of a radio station is more or less seen as bad. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that these songs that Wage War are putting out are bad because they're being marketed for radio. I think that where it falls short for me with those types of songs, and potentially more songs that are on Octane Radio on SiriusXM, is that there's just kind of a blandness to them, and it just makes them unexciting. And I think that's absolutely what happened with a song like Magnetic. Obviously, it came out and it was released to radio and different things like that. And I think, when you look at the lyricism on a song like that, it has things that we've heard so many times before. You and me are going to be magnetic. One taste and I'm undone. Like, these are things that we've heard so many times before. There's no, exciting piece to it or no thing that makes that stand out above the rest. But then we can kind of turn it to a song like Tombstone, because Tombstone has lyrics on it that says, the sun's setting on a wanted man and there's no spine or backbone. I'm two-faced, too late to a tombstone. It's just different. And I know that I definitely cut some words out of that lyric drop that I just did, so it's probably going to be a little confusing, but just go listen to it and you'll hear what I'm talking about. But it's just a little different because you get that song like Tombstone where it has that heaviness. And I can't remember if it's Self-Sacrifice or Nails on the heavy side that has another line in it that says something to the effect of, the bones lay waste, you can rot with the maggots. That is a heavy lyric. That's a thought-provoking lyric. That's something that's going to stand out. But then you flip right back into a song like Hellbent and you get lines that are, give me a sign before it's too late, and this is such a lucid nightmare. Again, these are all things that we've heard before. There's nothing exciting about someone giving you a sign before it's too late. It's been done over and over and over again. Let's try something a little new. And that's not to say that, when I'm talking about, these octane core, softer side of Wage War songs that I don't like. That's not the case, because there's a song on here called Blur, which I really love. That was one of my favorites off of this entire album. And I think that's one of the things that makes this album so confusing for me, is that I did feel like there were more heavy songs than there were octane songs on here. I feel like there were really only 2 or 3 in that span, but when you have an album that's only 10 to 12 songs long, and the album's only 31 minutes, if, 5 to 8 of those minutes are taken up by something that just doesn't sound great or that's very bland, that's a quarter of the time of the album that you're just spent going, oh God, this just isn't great. And when they're not all in a row, that makes it even worse, because then it's like, okay, you get into this rhythm of, you get a couple songs and you're like, all right, Wage War's definitely trying to go more heavy with this album. They're trying to give more screams or more deep lyricism. And then you go right into a song like Magnetic, and you're like, well, fuck, now we're back to square one here. And then you kind of rise back up again, and then you drop back down with Hellbent. It just doesn't, it was too hard to make sense of. Like, there was not the cohesion that I was looking for on this album. And I think that's why it didn't stand out to me. I think overall this was okay. This was an okay album. But because I was just so confused trying to, determine where this album was trying to go and what this band was trying to say, I just don't know that it's one that I'm going to revisit a whole lot this year. And that's unfortunate, because I really do like Wage War as a band. I like their sound when they go on that heavier side, but I also do like sometimes when they strip it back a little bit and tone it down with a song like Blur. But overall, this is going to be a 7.8 out of 10 for me. Like I said, not a bad album, just not one that I'm personally going to revisit a lot this year. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Stigma by Wage War. Next up, we have Forget Me Nots by Sunday Morning. This is an EP from Sunday Morning. I believe it's their second, but their first EP since, I believe, 2020. And this is a fantastic EP. They are a self-described refined hardcore band, and I don't know what the fuck that means, but whatever this sound is, I really enjoy it. So this band is one that I got to see last year live. Before I really knew about any of their music, before I knew much about them, I got to see them. They opened up for Gabe Woodrow, who I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and I really enjoyed what I heard, so I was really interested to see what they had. And at the time, they really hadn't gotten any new music out since like 2020, so it was a little disappointing to see, and I was like, okay, that must mean that something's on the horizon. Well, yeah, something was on the horizon, and something was brewing in a very, very good way. Wait has such an interesting flow and lyricism to it. I love the line in there that says, "These calloused hands want to feel you the same as a lifetime ago." And that's just an interesting way to me to say that, like, I've been through so much and we've been through so much together that I might be a little different and things might not be the same, but when we get together or when we hold hands, I want it to feel the same as kind of the first time we met. And that's just, again, it's all about this interesting twist and this different way of saying something that we've heard before. We've all heard I want things to be the way that they used to be. Well, that's been done before, but calloused hands that want to feel you the same way as I did a lifetime ago, that's never been done before, at least not that I'm aware of. So that's what makes things more interesting. And that's what made this such a good listening experience from start to finish, is that there is just a flow to it. With EPs, it's hard sometimes to catch a flow, because I feel like sometimes EPs are used as, I refer to EPs as experimental projects, even though I know that that's not what it stands for, because sometimes when they do EPs, bands and artists will just throw a collection of 5 to 7 songs out there and just see what sticks. And then they use that to move into an album. But that's not the case here. I feel like it's very cohesive in what Sunday Morning was trying to do on Forget Me Nots. And a song like Mon Calamari is such a favorite because it has this like beautiful slow start to it. And there's this gradual speed up into the chorus. And then once the chorus hits, you have this mid to up tempo sound, and then it starts to slow down again. And it's just a great construction of a song. And you don't see songs constructed that way a whole lot anymore, in the sense that somebody definitely took the time to pay attention to say, like, all right, let's speed up, let's slow down, let's speed up, let's slow down, but we have to do it in the right way or else it's not going to make sense. And it absolutely made sense on this song. And it flows into a perfect EP ender in Cordially, which was, again, such a favorite for me. So look, overall, I was really impressed with Sunday Morning's EP. I am super excited to see where this band goes from here, because when you take some time off and try to potentially refine your sound into what they've done, and you release an EP like this that is so well done, it just makes my expectations for this band go even higher. This EP is a 5 out of 5 for me. There is nothing wrong with it. There is no holes in it whatsoever. I am super stoked to see what this band has on tap for us the rest of this year and moving into next year. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out the new EP, Forget Me Nots, from Sunday Morning. Next up is Meds by The Used. This is The Used, I believe, 14th album at this point, and it's the follow-up to last year's Toxic Positivity, and let's all sit back and appreciate just how much Toxic Positivity sucked. I really hate to say that because I do like The Used, and obviously they are legends in the alt-rock music genre, but Toxic Positivity last year was just an absolutely brutal thing for me to review because I didn't know how to. You know, I've never been one to come on a podcast and bash an album. That's not my style. That's not who I am. If I don't like an album, I'm just not going to review it. And unfortunately, I felt like I needed to review an album like that, and so it was not fun to to come out and say that this album sucked, but I was interested. I was interested to see what a follow-up to Toxic Positivity would sound like. And I was very skeptical, obviously, going in, but then they get the title track, Meds, released, and that track's a banger. And I immediately stop and say, I wonder if this is going to be a return to form. I wonder if this is what they were really looking for, because this was also kind of marketed as a B-sides, and when it's marketed as that, the first thought I'm thinking is, fuck, here we go again. This is going to be another 10 to 12 song album of the same shit from Toxic Positivity, and I'm not going to want to talk about it. But that's not the case. I do want to talk about this album a little bit because I think there are some things that, you know, we need to talk about with it. First off, this is a much better project overall than Toxic Positivity. I'm talking miles better than that album. And the beginning of this album has such a steady flow of up-tempo tracks that it's hard not to like it. We get that up-tempo track on something like Sisyphus, which is just a fun track about not really wanting to let someone down. And it flows into this like hauntingly weird track called Depression Personified. But again, it's just not all there, because we have a track like Terrified, which is just lacking kind of overall lyrics and music. Take Yourself Out is an okay track, but the flow in it, in terms of the vocal delivery, just doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really work. And it ends on a decent track called Pain Is My Therapy. And the reason that I point that one out is because that one has a line in it that really stood out where it says, "There's a noose around my neck that shows what it means to breathe." And that one just kind of stopped me for a second, because noose around my neck that shows me what it means to breathe is interesting because it doesn't really make sense, because people would say, okay, well, if you have one around your neck, you're not breathing. But once you have that around your neck, it's kind of that feeling of, oh shit, how am I going to, things are more, I don't know how to say it, but basically life's more valuable in that moment, because within an instant it could be gone. So it's an interesting lyric. And look, overall, this, like I said, it's a better album. It really is. But when I give it a numerical rating, I'm going to give it a 7.8 out of 10. It's very similar to that Wage War album, where there's some high points, but there's also some low points. And with The Used, I think that might just be where we're at that point in their career. I don't know that we're going to get these absolutely flawless albums or these great things. I think there's always going to be those flashes of what we've come to know and love. Meds or Sisyphus, one of those two songs are perfect for what you would expect. But there's always going to be those weird kind of experimental tracks that I feel like bands are always going to experiment with when they're this far along in their career. Like I said at the beginning, this is the 14th album, so there's bound to be some changes that are going to happen, and there's bound to be some things that you're not going to like. So at the end of the day, it really boils down to, is this something that you like, or is this something that you don't? For me, it's just kind of in between. I don't really have much to say about it in terms of whether I like it or I don't like it. It's one that I'm not going to revisit a lot this year. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go check out Meds by The Used and let me know what you think. Next up is Therapy Sessions by Cawston. This is the pop punk, pop rock group's first real album, and it's damn good. This was a fun one to listen to. Talk Too Much really hits home, because there's a line that says, I feel at home with my anxiety, and it doesn't really bother me. And a lot of people suffer and deal with and live with anxiety, and a lot of people will say that it doesn't bother them. And whether that's true or not, it's just the reality of living with something like anxiety. Sometimes you just have to be okay with it, and sometimes you just have to accept that that's what you have. Strangers is this energetic track that I've been playing a lot this year. It's definitely been one that I've gravitated towards. And another one that I gravitated towards was a song called Safe With Me, because Safe With Me made me immediately think of a Paramore comparison with this band. Cawston has a Paramore comparison, and it should be made. If you're a fan of Paramore, or you're a fan of bands similar to Paramore, Stand Atlantic, those types, Cawston's going to be a band for you. Cawston's going to be a band that you really like and learn to love. And the reason I point that out is because Therapy Sessions from Cawston, this specific album, is one that every single person needs to listen to if they complain that there are no new bands out there, and there are no new bands that do what these bands used to do back in 2008 or 2010 or whenever it was, and those golden days of pop rock, pop punk music are dead. That's bullshit. If you go out and you look hard enough, there are bands that are still doing things similar to that, but with a modern twist on it, and that's exactly what Cawston does on this record. And there's a case to be made that they do it better than some of the other bands. When I look at bands that I would recommend to people that have that complaint, that say, oh, there's no new bands out there, the first names that come to mind are Arrows in Action, Honey Revenge, Magnolia Park, Loveless. These are bands that are doing it right. And now Cawston's right up there with them, because that's exactly the sound that I got on this album, and I knew it was coming, and I'm glad that it came through in the way that I expected it to. Serotonin is such a clever track on this album, because it's such a clever wordplay on basically wanting serotonin, and it's a dose of serotonin for your head that's making you hopefully get over this homesick feeling that you have. And it flows into a song that's a collaboration with Cheney Elaine, who we've talked about on the podcast before as the front of House Parties. But I think my favorite is probably Quicksand on this album, and it's hard to pick a favorite off of an album like this where there's so many high points that, I'm saying Quicksand, but tomorrow it could be Strangers, tomorrow it could be Talk Too Much. It doesn't really matter. This is a really, really strong album. Overall, it's going to get an 8.8 out of 10 for me. and I'm really looking forward to following this band more in the future. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Therapy Sessions by Cawston. Next up is Intrusive Thoughts by Roderik. This is the post-hardcore pop punk emo-ish band's debut EP, and this is another really solid EP. EPs these past couple of weeks have been out of this world good, and this continued the trend. The Joshua Roberts feature on there is awesome, and sonically, this EP is super, super strong in the sense of it kind of reminds me a little bit of a Point North or a First and Forever sound, where you get these harmonies sung, but you also get some screams in there as well. So you kind of get like the best of both worlds here. And the best of both worlds piece is very evident on a song like Pretty Lost. You have singing, screams, but there's also some higher notes that really demonstrate the range that this band has as well. But my favorite on this EP was Worst in Me. And there's another comparison that I knew I just couldn't think of it, and it wasn't until I got to this track where I figured it out, and it's Catch Your Breath. That is 100% what I was hearing a lot in these tracks. And it's the most complete track on the album. It has everything that you want lyrically, sonically, whatever it may be. But Roderik's a band that's been on my radar for some time now. I'm really looking forward to more from them. And this debut EP is a great start. So it's going to be a 4.6 out of 5 for me. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Intrusive Thoughts by Roderik. The last album is Volume 1 by Sessions. This is the debut album from Sessions, and I've really been looking forward to this band's debut. I love this sound because it's so different, and that's what makes it stand out. I've talked about a lot of the singles that they've released on these podcasts that I've done, so this is going to be on the shorter side review-wise, but Sorry Not Sorry is such a perfect old-school feeling that's kind of perfect for summer, and the same thing can be said about a song like Dissimulator. Those are the two that I wanted to at least mention because I haven't talked about those two in particular a lot, but those were my favorites off of this album. Like I said, because I've talked about the singles a lot, I don't want to go on and on and on, but I want everybody to listen to this album. It is such a good album, and because of the uniqueness of the sound, there's not really a way for me to explain it without you going and listening to it. So it is an 8.8 out of 10 for me, this album. It was a great time to listen to. I hope everybody's going to go listen to it, but if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Volume 1 by Sessions. That wraps it up for our album reviews, but the last thing I want to touch on is a tour review. I was able to get out and catch the Arrows in Action tour, and it was Arrows in Action, Brooke, Alex, and Elliot Lee. I was a little late to the show, so I only got to catch a little bit of Elliot Lee's set, but it looked like a good time from what I could tell. Brooke Alex is an artist that I wasn't super familiar with going in, but there's definitely some energy in those sets, and I was really impressed with the vocal delivery on a lot of the different songs. So it's an artist that I'm definitely going to take a deep dive into when I get a chance, but obviously Arrows in Action was the headliner, and you know how I feel about that band. They had my number one album of the year last year with Built to Last, and they didn't disappoint. I mean, I knew that Arrows was going to be a good time. I've seen them live before when they opened up for Magnolia Park last year, and funny enough, the venue that I went to was the same venue that they opened for Mag Park in, and I think they may have had a bigger crowd than Magnolia Park did last year, and I've been to this venue in Baltimore, Auto Bar, many, many times for many, many shows. A lot of the shows that you guys hear me talk about and review take place there. And I can say with pretty much 100% certainty that that is the loudest I've ever heard that venue for a band. People were dancing, singing. We had a couple of crowd surfers, and this was not a easy night for them to perform. I mean, it was probably 95 degrees. It was hot. It was humid. I think I saw on Instagram that Matt posted that he had to get out of there early because he was starting with signs of heat stroke. Like, this was not an easy time to perform, but the energy that these guys came out with was just out of this world. Arrows in Action is a band that, again, I will continue to bang the table for and say that they are poised for such great, great things. All of the new songs played really well live, Cold, Hello Sunlight, and the old stuff still hits just as hard as it did back when I listened to it for the very first time. So really fun tour. I know it by the time that this podcast comes out, the tour is probably over, but next time they're on tour, go check them out. You guys are going to absolutely love them if you haven't seen them yet. That wraps it up for us here on this second part of our album roundup for Matrix Music Review. I hope everybody enjoyed, and we will see you next time with the final part of our album roundup before we go right into our mid-year tier list. See you then.